Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to. We can find out the pizza and the meeting's already gonna go. Good. And we're gonna roll on the pizza and the meeting's already gonna go. Forward.
What is it gonna be a long meeting, you know?
So you learn. Jim. That's good. What you can plan to finish it for me. I usually go there once a week. Usually go out to my office and. Right there, we'll go once a week.
Are you there, John? Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so it seems like the meeting got set up with a password.
Okay. All right. We don't usually use passcodes, but I'll check it out.
Right. Can you open up the administrator section of Zoom?
Yes.
So can you look at the details of that meeting? There should be two check boxes, like one for council, one for waiting room. If you log into the Zoom, meeting, on the side, left hand column. And then choose the meeting you're in. Or to here.
Yeah.
Do you see other units?
I'm trying, I'm clicking on it, but it's not editing. It's not opening up. Yes.
Yeah, to close the meeting this time. But,
Hold on, wait, I have it.
or,
I have it.
okay,
827.
hold on.
Yep.
I gotta write this down. Okay, go.
827-148.
Okay, I'll be ready.
All right.
I'm trying to log in from the phone, just. Can you hear the big side phone? It's supposed to be. Yeah, so I was able to join.
You were.
Hey, sorry about the delay.
Hello, John. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the meeting. If there are no alternates to seat, any additions or changes to the agenda?
No additions.
Okay. The minutes of April 22nd, 2024. Any corrections from anybody? Additions? I'll make a motion, we accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Justin is first. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstentions? Mr. Tabor, you're up.
No, I'm approving.
Okay, great, thank you. Audience of citizens, anything from anybody that isn't already on the agenda? Unfinished businesses, nothing. New business, we do have to set a date for a public hearing for zoning amendments. Justin, if we want to add a few additional items to it, maybe we should go back under new business and discuss. Hey, John, we, in our subcommittee meeting at 6 o'clock tonight, we had some potentially maybe another round of items that we could add to this regulation change with regard to what we use as defining structures. There were some simple modifications we might like to add. Procedurally, if we wanted to pursue it, could we? And if we could, what might be the best way to approach it?
Yeah, no, I think you can, if you want to proceed with that and put that on the table as a possible application for amendment and for setting a public hearing, I would just suggest doing a brief introduction of what that is, and then going ahead and receiving that as an application and scheduling it as a hearing.
Do I need to modify our agenda to reflect that potential?
Yeah, you probably should maybe move your section, your 8.1 regulation revision up to new business also.
Okay, so I'm going to, at the time, make a motion that we take item 8, modification to definition of structure, 8.1 that is under item 8, and move it ahead of item 7.1 under new business to discuss. So we'll renumber 7.1, 7.2, and number 7.2, and we numbered 7.3, and that will now become item 7.1. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye, unanimous. So the agenda is modified. So Justin, why don't you present what we discussed at the subcommittee meeting for that commission?
You want to start with the structure piece?
Yeah, the structure piece, because I potentially want to also schedule a public hearing on this if everybody is so inclined.
Okay.
After discussing it.
Yep, so everybody should have this in their packet, so it's the definition of a structure. So when this had been tabled at the subcommittee for a little bit, it's because there was some discussion on minimum standards of what a structure should be defined as. There are some pretty transparent challenges, I think, that we agree on in the subcommittee that probably, at least for a first step, even though some of us, me, don't feel as if this probably doesn't go as far as we could or should, we can eventually cross that bridge when we get there, and we need to. But in the time being, John has been so great just as to change some of the wording in here, which I think will help internally with their processes to eliminate some confusion around some of the really minor things that now require a zoning permit. There's a lot of stuff that needs a zoning permit when you look into it. So in the second paragraph, the way it's written now is with the change, the way the change is, it says retaining walls, public utility equipment as defined herein, residential heating, air conditioning, condenser units, propane tanks, handicapped accessible ramps, and generators meeting current building code are not considered structures under these regulations. The way the regulations are now, if you have a condenser unit, put in a split system that technically requires a zoning permit, which seems unreasonable. If you have a small propane tank, you need to get a zoning permit, handicap ramp, all of that stuff. So this would make it better defined and a little bit easier for people. Some of the things that we talked about, so that would essentially be the, so from where it is now. Some of the things, and Rick and will chime in on this. We did talk about propane tanks, maybe of a certain size or a certain distance from the house being regulated or not regulated. And then it's kind of the same thing with generators, so someone doesn't put it too far away from the house, too close to a neighbor. But beyond that, I think, you know, that was kind of where the discussion went, so if you guys have anything to add?
So to that, the thoughts we segmented, looking at 500-gallon and above propane tanks. And the typical smaller tanks that are adjacent to a house. And so we discussed whether we wanted to categorize propane tanks, for example, into based on the number of gallons. Or maybe very simply say any propane tank that's located, or any device, meaning a compressor, generator, or propane tank located within 10 feet of the existing structure is no longer considered a structure under the zoning regulations. And then if somebody has a 500-gallon tank, they're not gonna locate it immediately adjacent to the house. We thought maybe we should reach out to our building official to see if that was the case, because people tend to want to put those big ugly tanks away from their house, but we don't want them to put it next to their neighbor's house in tight quarters.
There's, we may speak, Mike Lester, Fire Marshal, there is code in NFPA 58 in regards to distances that propane tanks have to be from the structure, from electrical sources and from property lines.
And is that,
And I usually review them all.
okay, so for example, the 120-gallon tanks that are typically right adjacent to the house.
Those can pretty much go anywhere. What I call the fat boy, the little bit bigger one, they can pretty much go anywhere. But the bigger ones, I think the big 1,000-gallon has to be 35 feet from the property line.
Okay,
And if it's buried, obviously it can go, it has to be 35 feet also, but it can be buried.
okay.
The ones on top of the ground, they are not pretty.
So if by saying anything located within 10 feet of the structure, by the current regulations, those bigger tanks have to still go through a zoning permit, because we don't want somebody locating them necessarily closer to their neighbor's house than theirs if they're in tight quarters.
And having another discussion with the official, including you, that would help, because there's some of this stuff may already be regulated. If there's 35-foot setback.
Jason and I already, I think it's, don't quote me, there is a sketch. Matter of fact, Terry has it on the back wall, kind of reference to the minute ago.
So, trying to make it more simple, to put a generator in, to do, a new compressor, an air conditioning compressor, mini splits that are mounted on the foundation or on a pad, propane tanks that you might add because you put a gas fireplace in, those you can put right next to the house. We figured no part of that tank could be more than 10 feet away from the house. And that probably covers it. Maybe we might narrow it down a little more, but I don't think we need to. It's either near the house or it's not.
Yeah. Why my regulations don't tell you it has to be so far from the house, it just tells you it can't be within distance of usually electrical or basement window.
Yeah, I'm aware of
Stuff
that.
like that, so, yeah.
And that's why I had a tank in my house all the way, because I put a mini split in and I didn't want to relocate the propane tank, so now.
Anyway, it is the building official and myself who look at all those.
Okay. Bob, I'm sorry, you were gonna say something?
No, I think if it's covered in the fire code or even building code, then I don't think we need to be very specific about it. And that's, you know, we try to do something bigger than conflict or whatever, so I think just leave it the way it is.
So yeah, exempting those 3 items, if located within 10 feet of this existing structure, I think there's putting language in to allow that becomes very safe and makes it's automatic. You just put it in. And then you just have to conform to building and fire codes.
Yeah, it makes sense, because a lot of stuff is double regulated if we're not careful, so.
Okay,
Um,
so that was one of those caveats.
So I'm sorry. So the result of this, are we I put the thing on the screen. I don't know if you guys can see it.
Yes,
Are we making a modification to propane tanks?
Generators and compressors.
I think all those items, and public utility equipment, we weren't sure what that meant. Maybe cabinets that are installed in a subdivision, but those are typically identified. So what we're trying to do is take the things that cause the most agita for the zoning enforcement officer having to review, that we don't feel any need to review, and not having the zoning officer have to review them. That they still, you know, have to comply with all the, fire code and, building codes. So I thought adding, those items that are described there and whether we include the retaining wall and public equipment in this description. But putting the describing language in there to say, you know, if we included retaining walls, and we may not want to. Retaining walls, public utility equipment is defined herein. I can read it better here. Residential heating, air conditioning, condenser units, propane tanks, handicap accessible ramps and generators meeting current building code. Located within 10 feet, no farther than 10 feet from the existing structure are not considered structures under these regulations. I think adding the no farther than 10 feet, now the ramps, I don't think we can prohibit them from putting a handicap accessible ramp. Even if it, you know, I think state statute would trump our regulations.
No, it wouldn't. I think case law has allowed ZBAs to essentially, you know, accept handicap as a hardship. But it's not memorialized in statute that way.
Oh, really?
And that would be my only reservation on your 10-foot thing, Rick, because again, you know, a wide or you know, to in order to get your slope, a handicap ramp might need to extend 10 feet from the, you know.
Well, then on the handicap ramps, might we want to not have that have to conform with being within 10 feet of the structure? Because in most of the ones I've seen, yeah,
Right.
they're much bigger than that.
So my question is, do you want to just move handicap ramp so that, well,
I think the idea, John, is to call out specifically propane tanks and generators and.
okay, all right,
Compressors.
Compressors, yeah.
and
Yeah.
so maybe move handicap ramps up
With
here.
retaining walls and public utility equipment, and then put the 10-foot describer for the other three items.
And then what-
But we're trying to tack this on so we save enough, another public hearing.
yeah, and then there's something probably review real quick. Once you find this too.
Okay.
Something like that. So I've moved handicap accessibility ramps to the beginning, added an or to separate, and then residential heating, air conditioning units, propane tanks, and generators within 10 feet of the principal building, comma, meeting current building code.
Maybe instead of within, no greater than might be more accurate, because somebody might construe within to mean some part of it is within 10 feet as
Okay.
opposed to the entire structure. Yeah, that looks spot on.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Now, while we're doing this, I'm gonna everybody give their own input. It would be worth going through the original verbiage just to make sure if some of the things that require a zoning permit that are now considered structures, we don't want to move. So I'm gonna skip over some of the things in this first paragraph that we did move down to not being considered a structure, but let's read through this. So a structure is anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires a location on the ground or attachment to something having a location on the ground. As used in these regulations, structures shall include, but are not limited to, buildings, swimming pools, towers, docks, balconies, porches, decks, chimneys, handicap ramps, which we moved, bay windows, okay, above ground storage tanks, which kind of we moved, satellite dishes in 2024, do they need some permit? Ground mounted solar panels, fences or walls greater than 6 feet in height, and outdoor storage containers. So is there anything in there that doesn't make sense that it shouldn't need a permit? Like a bay window or a satellite dish?
Yeah, I think the bay window needs a permit. You know, a bay window, and I don't think a dock does, because they're never on private land, they're on town land. You just need to get permission from the town to do it.
The law addresses that question. The last paragraph addresses that.
Oh, structures such as piers, docks, boat ramps, and lifts are permitted structures exempt from the minimum yard requirements. But they're still,
It tells you.
you still need this, yeah, but you would still need a zoning permit too. Well, then why is it?
I don't think you can, I don't think you need to get it in.
Yeah, I don't see
It's
why
not
not.
a new property, it's on town.
Well, that's what Columbia Lake and Monopond state owned property. And well, yeah, why would we need to have docks, have a zoning permit?
Okay, so all right, so I maybe have misunderstood then. So it's defined as a structure, but it wouldn't need a zoning permit,
Okay,
right? Okay,
okay.
but things like bay windows or satellite dishes,
Satellite dishes, I can't imagine any.
No,
I mean, and maybe in 1980, when you had a
yeah, but there's. Again, bay windows, I wouldn't,
bay windows.
I don't wanna regulate those,
It's about chimneys.
I don't wanna regulate those.
Take it out and.
So take out chimneys, take out bay windows.
Tell me if you agree with me, how do we make life simple for the public?
I know, this is where the confusion comes in, it's like you need a permit for things.
How about chimneys serving the dwelling? Because somebody could have a chimney that services on the whole building.
Like a grill, or fireplace, outdoor fireplace, or whatever.
Outdoor kitchen.
Yeah. And we just servicing
Servicing the dwelling.
leave it in. That's good.
Okay,
I'm fine with moving those, I think it makes it easier.
okay.
John, does that make sense?
There was some crosstalk there. I'm not sure that I caught what you were talking about, like the specific you were.
Why don't you speak to the point or overall?
No, it was suggested, John, that we take out bay windows and satellite dishes.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that makes sense.
And then we talked about maybe taking chimneys out, but what if somebody has a freestanding outdoor kitchen? Or fireplace with a chimney or something like that, so maybe we should leave that back in.
Well, that's different. Yeah, I don't think there'd be that much danger of you know, if someone had an outdoor kitchen, you know, whatever, a pizza oven or something like that that had a chimney, that's the chimney isn't the thing. It's, you know, it's accessory too. I don't know. I mean, yeah, and so in that case, actually, then if you know you needed a permit for an outdoor kitchen or something like that, you get for the kitchen, not for the chimney. So I you know, I think chimneys can be removed. I'd be okay with that. I just talked myself back around.
That might be regulated.
Oh, and handicap ramps we want to get rid of there.
These contain, yeah.
Yes, I would take the handicap ramps out of a structure. But I think this is enough for now. Is everybody good with this, the way where we have it? So this would be under item 7.1. Okay, let's get everybody back to the meeting. Okay, so 7.1 would be these changes to the definition of structure as John outlined.
Oh, do you want me to put it back up on the screen again?
No, I think we're clear about it.
Okay.
Anyone need it up on the screen? Okay. So item 7.1, we're gonna schedule a public hearing for all three of these at one time. So let's put that in the queue and we'll go on to 7.2 that was previously labeled 7.1. We're gonna go to the changes. Justin, you want to talk through that?
Yeah, which one do we want to start with, multifamily?
Yeah, but, yes.
Okay, so a lot of the conversation after last meeting was with Mike about issues with the review for the fire marshal, and we probably had way more conversations than he wanted to, but we had some really good discussions about it. So the first thing that we did from suggestions from the last meeting, which we added in, it's in your packet, page 4, letter M, fire protection. So there's concern about not just this project, but other types of projects, but this is the one in front of us. To make sure that there is a review by the fire marshal so that suggestions can be made as part of the process. And so we added this sentence or this line: the applicant shall submit a fire protection assessment letter from the Columbia Fire Marshal that includes recommendations for the installation of any facilities necessary to provide sufficient water for the development. A lot of, I keep China, but a lot of the concern was around water access. And we have verbiage in some of the other regulations about cisterns and things like that, but they're more arbitrary. So some of the conversations that Mike and I had was, first of all, if this remains as it is, and an applicant was to come forward, we would have to have a fire marshal review, and the fire marshal would come back to us with recommendations. And if there were recommendations for water access or anything else, we could make that as a condition of the application to get it approved. We also talked about spitballing different scenarios. Well, how do we know where water is needed? Mike and the fire department know that, and they're working through a map to pinpoint where the areas are where we have water access now, and then where the dead zones are. So if an applicant comes in and, that's a concern and they're in the dead zone, well, maybe we need to have them put in a cistern, or there needs to be another discussion as part of the application. If they're within a covered area, then they're in a covered area, like it's kind of cut and dry. So that was the first thing that would help go through the process. That's the regulatory piece. The second side of it is had some conversations with John last week about, okay, well, how does that communication take place internally at the town hall through this process? Are there check sheets? Is there sufficient communication? And I think, like with everything, that can always be improved. So that's something that John and I discussed to make sure that it's tightened up, so that as the application comes in at the appropriate time, the fire marshal gets notified, the review takes place, and then everybody's ready as it comes back to the commission. So I think from a process perspective, those are things I'm more than happy to help with. I know John and I talked about it, and I think that's a pretty easily solvable thing. The other piece of it, we may look at this as kind of a temporary thing and revisit this. In fact, within the subcommittee, I'm gonna plan on revisiting this. So in our regulations broadly, there's section 51.3, which is our considerations, commission considerations. All the way at the bottom, it says all building structures, uses, equipment, or material area readily. All building structures, uses, equipment, or material are readily accessible for fire and police protection. It's not really strong, and it doesn't necessarily talk about a review, although we have it in this section. So there may be other types of projects and applications more broadly that we should specifically talk about a fire marshal review and needs. But the idea would be to eventually strengthen up the language within the regulations themselves, like in a separate spot. So then if there's 4 or 5 different projects under a special permit or a site plan or whatever it is, that we need to refer back to that section instead of writing individual lines like we did with this one to get us through this process, which specifies exactly what we need. So eventually I could envision where we take this line out of the multifamily regulation and just refer to a stronger regulation.
So we talked also about the application checklist.
Yeah.
Possibly needing to have a line item that says the submission by the fire marshal,
Yeah.
recommendation submitted by the fire marshal.
Yeah, that's what John and I talked about, is do we have a checklist? Is it clear? That's an internal process challenge.
One other thing that I brought up,
It's another safety measure.
Yep.
to make sure.
so in the case of where an application comes in and they have to have inland wetland review, it isn't really the zoning department's responsibility to shepherd that through inland wetlands. Should we put the onus on an applicant to approach the fire marshal directly and request that review? And then they have to present back to us that review So that's a step that we don't have to control through the zoning process, but rather,
But if it was in the application checklist. For any substantial application, whether it be a site plan review or a special permit application, it just said. That it needed to be, Mike's review had to be included in that application process. That's the safety net right there, and that puts the.
I don't mind putting it in the checklist, but what I'm really trying to say,
It does what you're talking about.
it's the responsibility of the applicant to get that request for a review to our fire marshal.
But again, if they submit and if they haven't checked that box that says that they've done it, then their application.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? So it does.
So the-
John,
So I would say, I think, you're saying largely the same things, Walt. I would just suggest that if you're going to put it in the checklist, you also put it in the application requirements. Because the checklist itself is not regulatory, it can be kind of modified on the fly.
I would agree with that too. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
The other thing, Justin, just going back to section M. The way this is written, it sounds like the assessment letter is requiring recommendations. So where it says Columbia Fire Marshal, that includes, if applicable, recommendations for the installation of facilities.
Yeah, John, what do you think about that? That's not a bad suggestion because
It's sort of.
they may or may not have recommendations.
Right.
Could you phrase that again, the way you said it, Robert?
Yeah, the applicant shall submit a fire protection assessment letter from the Columbia Fire Marshal that includes, if applicable, recommendations.
Oh,
For the
yeah,
installation.
sure.
Because it may not, you may not have to go do it.
Mike, how do you feel about that?
That's fine. It was, the review is gonna be is if there's significant water within a certain distance.
Right.
Working. And how much time.
But then your letter would say that.
With the fire.
Your letter would say, yes, it does.
The distance that, I mean, some towns are 1,500 feet, some towns are 2,500 feet. So,
But the point is, your letter is gonna say, yes, there is adequate fire, water supply, or no, this is what I recommend.
Yeah.
So it's either one or the other. Okay. There are, some towns that have application review meetings where in the wetlands, the zoning official, fire marshal, sometimes there's a police chief involved because of traffic or whatever, but there's a meeting with all those people together in one room. So that the applicant only has one meeting to do. And maybe something.
That could be a procedural thing that.
Right.
That we want to
Yeah, exactly. Just a lot easier than the applicant having to go chase people around and set
Well,
meetings.
yeah, ultimately, that's what we want to do. I like that idea, and that's something that we should review internal process around to make sure that we're being efficient, because there's some inefficiencies. That's a good example. We're talking about.
And I'll bring up later the idea of any infrastructure improvements that might be funded by grants. I'll bring that up in an open discussion a little later.
Yeah, you can talk about that.
Okay.
So that was the bulk of kind of the follow-up from the multifamily piece. Do you have any?
no, I think that the process is gonna be better than it has been. And, if that's the follow-up,
I appreciate you're getting involved. It's just.
structure's going up and there's nothing in there to, require water, or make sure that there is water in the areas. It's difficult down the road after it's approved and built, when it's gonna happen, is there any neighbors, there any fire? Hopefully, we can tighten things up and make it work. Right, don't be too restrictive, but you gotta have a little bit of teeth in something so you can get something done. And, I think it'll be good.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
So that's one small part of the multifamily that we propose to go to public hearing with. Does anyone want to review it? We've already reviewed this quite a bit, but I'm happy to go through any other aspects of the proposing. We're looking to set the public hearing for item 7.1 that we just talked. This item is now 7.2, not 7.1. We're going to go to public hearing on this, and then we're going to discuss item 7.3, what 7.2 at the start of the meeting. Any desire to review it, or comfortable saying that we're ready to go to public hearing on this?
I have a couple of things I'm gonna say in the public hearing.
Okay. Thank you. Well, next up is,
Accessory dwelling units, two-family dwellings, no substantive changes other than to the minimum square footage requirement, which seemed like there were several people in agreement that it needed to be a little larger, so under 8.3.3. We upped that to 750 square foot minimum. There was some public request for that, and I think the 750 square foot minimum was
Is it
from the
minimum or-
detached.
That's the max, that max.
I'm sorry, maximum. I'm sorry, maximum of 750 square feet was in response to some public comment about it and just internal discussion, so I think we landed in a good spot there. That's really the major change since then.
Actually, the way this is written, 750 square feet is based on, primary dwelling, 2,000 square feet or less.
Yeah, so
If you have a primary dwelling that's larger than 2,000 square feet, then it reverts back to
the 30%.
Okay, so you could have larger if you have a larger primary building.
Correct, yeah, sorry, it's good.
No, I think that makes sense.
If you have an 1,100 square foot house, we still want you to be able to do a 750 square. foot.
Okay,
That seems a lot.
We got a lot of good input on that.
Yeah.
So that said, with all these, the public hearing, when, from a logistical standpoint, what's the date that we should assign for, doing the public hearing, John?
I would suggest no sooner than the second meeting in June. Which would be the 20. Is that the 24th? Yeah, because we need to give, these are regulations that would be mandatory referrals to the COG. So we need to give them 35 days. So because the first meeting of June is the 10th, we don't even have 30 days. So I would suggest we give them to do the 24th.
So I'll make a motion that we, go to a public hearing for item 7.1 as in the revised agenda, 7.2 and item 7.3, and set that public hearing for June 24th, 2024 at 7 p.m. at the in the meeting room at Town Hall here.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? That would be unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
So now we don't have an item 8 any longer because we moved that to our new business agenda and communications and reports. A couple things in here. If you could explain this, Mr. Hardesty's name. What? Yeah, Latham Hill Road. What's going on there, John?
What's this item?
Those are the pieces that I sent you on Friday.
DOT about Latham Hill Road.
Oh, it's yeah, I need to pull up a copy of that. Hang on. Yeah, no, so this is just, this is a fairly standard thing that DOT sends that they need to, it's, anytime you have an encroachment onto a state highway, you have to get, the encroachment permit from DOT. And this was an approved subdivision. Apparently the applicant did not submit the town's subdivision approval at that time. As well as, basically just to add more detail, showing limits of pavement, and showing the whole thing with detailing that it's going to be mixed with, hot mix bituminous. It's a fairly straightforward thing. It's not really of much concern to the Planning and Zoning Commission, other than the fact that you guys were copied on it, to show the DOT's coordination on a driveway permit.
What is Latham Hill?
That's
Have you seen it?
that we approved the Latham Hill subdivision, all those really, 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 really wet lots down on Latham Hill Road, going up toward Lebanon on the left-hand side as you come down from Route 87.
What's that got to do with the DOT? Latham Hill's a town road.
It's, I think, does it access up, it accesses off of 87?
There's no wetlands. you're talking about,
Well,
or,
if it's the Latham Hill subdivision, that's what I'm talking, that's what I think.
yeah, I mean, there's something that we're not working.
Doesn't it touch Route 87?
No, not at all. Yeah, I just didn't understand this, John.
Where's the red lots?
Do you know what Lathan says?
It's something with utility lines within the DOT right.
Yeah. So like, I'm sorry, so there is no intersection with 87?
No, subdivision Rick's describing.
No, because it's the utilities, they're getting the utilities off of Route 87.
Could this be going back? Could this be going back to the original date that Latham Hill Road was created or subdivided down each side of the road? I have no idea what this is about.
It's hard to.
And Jerry Hardesty might have been our town engineer at the time.
So that's a good question. I wasn't familiar with the subdivision in question.
Well, you know, we can talk about it offline. I don't think we're gonna resolve anything tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it concerns us and if
It really doesn't, no.
we need to follow up. And
I
the
mean,
other,
On subdivision application.
yeah, the newsletters that you sent copies of, I actually found fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah, for the Federation of Planning and Zoning Agencies quarterly newsletter.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's,
okay.
I mean, to be clear, there really is no organization of association of planning and zoning agencies. It's basically attorney Steve Byrne puts out a newsletter, and he has a an LLC that he calls the Connecticut Federation of Planning and Zoning Agencies. It's not a nonprofit, it's not an association, there is no municipality on the board. It's a marketing arm for a land use attorney, but he does, put some interesting recent case law in there.
Okay. Thank
So,
you.
and I would note also on updates, where this hasn't been signed into law yet, but last week, Wednesday, at the very end of the legislative session before it closed, there was a bill passed, Bill 5474. And I'm still waiting to sort of see the final version of this. But it was the only bill that passed that addressed housing and local zoning matters. And there was one provision in there, and I don't think it would apply to Columbia, if I'm thinking correctly, but it did contain a provision that would allow the conversion of basically unused vacant nursing home facilities to be multifamily as of right. I don't know if there are any such facilities in Columbia that would apply to that, but that was a change that was made to the state law that requires basically municipalities to modify their regulations in order to enable that. The governor hasn't signed it yet. I assume he will, and that will become law, but that was an interesting note from the legislative session.
Okay. I'm gonna move on to commission open discussion. The thing I wanted to bring up in the subcommittee meeting that we had tonight, an idea that was put out there was if there's any grant money available that might help fund infrastructure improvement to create additional fire cisterns or other things that would aid firefighting, that I would want to pull the commission and say, are you open, if necessary, to a change or a modification of the plan of conservation and development? Because many times grants that are pursued have to be clearly identified in the plan of conservation development as a priority for the town. And so if that would help us get grant money to fund supplementing monies that would go to infrastructure improvements for firefighting, I would hope that the commission, and just like a kind of a consensus read, it would everybody be open to modifying our plan of conservation and development. And can we do that from a statutory standpoint? Can we make a modification of our past plan of conservation and development to add another item in there, especially with regard to whether or not it helps with a potential grant application that may or may not service?
Oh, yeah, of course. yeah, you would need to, you know, have some specific language and have a public hearing, because essentially any modification to your POCD would require a public hearing. We can, I can, you know, Justin and I talked a little bit about grants for infrastructure such as that. I can take a look at the POCD as it stands. I think there might ultimately be some existing language that we can point to support it, such that if we were to apply for a grant, we could, you know, claim some support in the POCD already. But if you want to be specific about it, yeah, we could.
So I throw that question out to the commissioner. Are you open to modifying the POCD if that aids in obtaining grant money to improve our infrastructure? I got a yes from everybody.
When is the plan of conservation and open space conservation?
4 years ago, I think.
Yeah, hold on.
It's not every 10 years.
This is 10.
Yeah. So we've got 2 years ahead of us. The other thing is, I don't know that we formally announced this, but Connie Kislik is retiring. And we are in the hunt for a new zoning enforcement officer. And Connie's a wonderful person. I called her specifically to tell her how much I appreciate her kindness as a person. And
When did she retire?
within a couple of weeks now, correct?
And
John?
end of May.
End of May.
I think this is a very good opportunity. You know, we've had challenges with. We've had conversations around the challenges, process, and everything. I think who takes that place, it is very important that we start with oversight, that we start with a partnership, that we work together with whoever that zoning enforcement officer is, so that everyone's on the same page. We have a great opportunity right now. I think as a commission, we ought to take it.
Good idea.
Yeah. So I just want to thank her for the service. It's a tough job. If offered to me, I wouldn't take it.
Question.
I don't want on the record saying that.
Question for you. The zoning enforcement officer is our responsibility.
Yes.
Are we part of the selection process, the interviewing process?
Sorry,
Did you come up with that? Anything on that?
I personally expressed that we should be, from my personal expression of that. So I don't know, we are, but we should be.
And I'll reach out. I mean, certainly we want John to help in the process. John, we really appreciate you.
Do you have?
Thank you. And yeah, no, for my money, it absolutely, you need someone from planning and zoning as part of the interview process, because, you know, technically it's an employee under the jurisdiction of the town manager, but you know, the zoning enforcement officer's job is to understand, interpret, and enforce your regulations. So it's really, really important that you're involved. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna reach out to Mark and to Steve Everett, Mark Walter, and formally express it.
Yeah, and well, ultimately, I think is that maybe was what Robert said, is it is statute. You know, if you're not involved in the process and you don't approve of the hire, you're under no obligation to appoint them as your zoning officer. So, you know, it really behooves the administrator to work closely with you.
You know, and I don't want anything negative to be construed by this, because I did call Connie and tell her she's a kind, wonderful soul, and I just said thank you. So thank you for the job done.
Can we get this so that position becomes full-time rather than 20 hours or whatever it is a week?
The budget way.
I don't
It's
think
not in the budget.
that would ever pass budgetary scrutiny.
I mean, the budget's gonna be.
Road.
You know, I hope we, you know, if we pass that zone regulation item 7.1, we take something off the plate of the zoning enforcement officer.
Okay.
You know, maybe we can whittle away at the things that we don't have to control.
And by starting in fresh, we'll be able to help define,
I said that to you, Justin.
whatever.
Has anyone been identified so far that is a party that's qualified for the job?
Imagine there's not much of a line.
But it's small.
Well, let me formally get an update on the process, and we'll talk about it at our next meeting. Now, John, formally, you have certification as a zoning enforcement agent if something in an emergency had to be handled, we have somebody to sign off on something.
And
But-
I've already been appointed by your commission as a a backup CEO.
So John has a certification that Connie never did. She was, grandfathered in, so to speak, but yeah, under John's official certification. Is that accurate? How would I describe it?
Yeah, and actually, while after that point, the legislature did clarify that Connie was fully, as you say, grandfather. She was fully allowed and had all the credentials.
Okay.
But yeah, I was appointed essentially as a push comes to shove legal challenge kind of thing.
Okay. Anything else anyone needs to bring up tonight? I'll make a motion that we adjourn. Anything from the public, audience and citizens?
I'm gonna make it really quick. I just wanted to again say, we really appreciate, on behalf of code, we really appreciate the process that the regulation review subcommittee and PMC has gone through. And we appreciate our input being heard. We'd still like that square footage to be a little bit larger, but we really appreciate the movement that people have made.
Bring it up at the public hearing.
Yeah. But it's
Make sure
really-
you pass that. I say, Walt, you were gonna say something?
No, I was gonna raise my hand for a second.
Hopefully we adjourn.
Adjourn.
Walt, seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you. John, thank you. Appreciate it.